Edifice of Trust podcast is a thoughtful discussion of today's current events from the perspective of America's founding principles. Welcome. From heart-pumping music to head-thumping commentary. In order for people to survive the crisis created by the coronavirus pandemic, the federal government will have to spend trillions of dollars. Yes, trillions. But not as checks to everyone in order to goose the economy, as the Republicans want to do, because the economy is tanking on government orders to close, not from a lack of demand. Also, not to fund abortion or other social justice initiatives, as the Democrats prefer, because we are not facing a problem of social justice, but a disease. Just think about it. It is estimated that the measures being taken to stop the spread of the virus will slash 10% from the 2020 GDP. That's about $2 trillion right there. $2 trillion in lost wages. $2 trillion in lost revenue. I'm not talking about the $11.5 trillion that the stock market has lost in less than a month, or huge corporations like Boeing where the revenue has sunk to zero. I'm talking about minimum wage workers at restaurants and bars that have closed. I'm talking about small mom and pop shops and strip malls scattered around suburbia. These people are losing a paycheck that they need in order to feed their children. These people are losing their life savings of sweat equity that they built up with 20 years of 80-hour work weeks. Those are the people that need help, and the government needs to step up and start writing checks to them. For workers that have lost their jobs, I would propose that the government pay for the lost wages beginning at $15 an hour for a 40-hour work week. That is $600 a week, $2,400 per month, to pay for food and diapers and other essentials. For workers earning more than $15 an hour, I would propose that they receive compensation equal to 50% of their pre-crisis income above $15 an hour, up to a cap of $30 an hour, or $4,800 per month. The government would also credit the accounts of such workers at Social Security and Medicare as if it had been withheld in the form of payroll taxes. For those people who continue working at critical jobs, such as healthcare workers and first responders, but also grocery store clerks, gas station attendants, electric and water utility workers, etc., I would propose that they receive a tax holiday for the duration of the crisis. These people are risking their lives and health to provide Americans with the critical services they need, and they should be compensated as well. These payments will not provide all the relief needed to weather this crisis. I would further propose that foreclosures and repossessions be stopped during the crisis, and that all loans, including student debt, credit card debt, and mortgages, be charged 0% interest, and that no principal payments be required, and no penalties or fees charged either. Lenders that need this revenue for their business operations would also receive the zero interest benefit. The Federal Reserve must be empowered to provide liquidity as lender of last resort during the crisis. This will require legislative action to change some of the provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act. Large companies and corporations will also need some assistance. Although some industries will be hit harder than others, everybody will be hurt by the pandemic. It may not be possible to make sure that the pain is felt equally, but we must make sure that everyone shares part of the burden. Many companies will be asking the government for assistance, but the government must ask for something in return. Companies could be compensated for keeping people on the payroll instead of dumping them onto the unemployment rolls. In return, company executives would temporarily reduce their salaries to help in this effort. All bonus and stock option programs must be suspended. It is interesting to note that during the crisis, income inequality will be greatly reduced, just as predicted by Walter Scheidel in his book, the Great Leveler. I wrote about this in my commentary, I Dream of Jeannie, published March 22nd, 2017. However, let's hope that this leveling is not permanent, which Dr. Scheidel says would require a huge number of deaths from the pandemic in order to have a lasting effect. All assistance should be applied as equally as possible across the entire economy. If anything, assistance must be tilted toward those affected most by this pandemic, the sick and the poor unemployed. Americans can endure great sacrifice as long as they know that everyone is sacrificing. These are emergency actions in response to a crisis and must be considered temporary, even though there will be many who will want to make them permanent. Time for that later. The stock market should not receive any assistance. The stock market crash is mostly psychological. The impact of the pandemic on companies is unknown, so there is no mechanism to establish a price for their stocks. Thus, the impulse is to sell. But in time, that impact will become known and it will be possible to price the stocks. And once we are through this pandemic, the U.S. economy will rebound. So sit tight. Don't look at your 401k statements for a year. Ponder that while you listen to a brief message. So, you are stuck at home in self-quarantine. What to do? You could watch television, but all the news talks about is the coronavirus, and there are no sports on TV. You could binge watch a Netflix movie, or you could read a book. Luckily for you, I have just published my new book, In Defense of Principle. It follows the same path of my earlier books, Principled Policy and Edifice of Trust. The book reviews what is happening around the globe and reaches the conclusion that the world is a mess. The book evaluates the existential threats and defense challenges that confront the United States from the perspective of the American founding principles, and develops policy recommendations based on those principles. You can find links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books on my website, www.edificeoftrust.com. Thank you. Welcome back. Many people will oppose the trillions of dollars needed to supply this assistance, but the need is real and many people will be hurt by the pandemic even with this assistance. The trillions of dollars of debt that the government will take on to offset the effects of the pandemic will add to the already huge amount of over $22 trillion in debt we already have. But this crisis is the reason we must have the ability to borrow money. Historically, the only debts the U.S. government had were debts to fund wars that constituted existential threats to the United States. The Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and the World Wars I and II. And this pandemic constitutes another existential threat. Our forefathers and ancestors did not blanch at the cost of saving the nation, and our current leaders have the same responsibility. But after those previous existential threats had passed, our forefathers and ancestors paid down that debt as fast as they could. They paid it down for two reasons. One, the country needed to rebuild its financial strength to have the necessary reserves to confront future existential threats. And two, they believed that the payments of interest and principal on the debt should not be a burden to future generations. The $22 trillion of government debt that we had prior to this pandemic was not incurred to confront existential threats. It was incurred to pay for mounting costs of entitlement programs that now constitute more than half of our country's annual budget and is projected to keep on increasing. Many people say they want and even deserve these and other entitlement programs. The cost of the new programs being proposed by the current crop of presidential candidates will add many more trillions to the national debt. Fine, I say. If the American people want entitlement programs, they should have them. But they should also pay for them. In the Nordic countries that are proffered as shining examples of a social welfare state, the people pay for their benefits in the form of high taxes. Not just taxes on the wealthy, taxes on everybody. As detailed in my commentary, A Nordic Fantasy, published November 19th, 2019. Assuming that we get through this current pandemic, we must then proceed to get our fiscal and financial house in order so that we are prepared for the next existential threat. $1 trillion deficit, as proposed by President Trump prior to this pandemic, was an abomination for a country that had record low unemployment and a growing economy. The coronavirus is not the only existential threat that this country will face in the near future, and we must begin preparing for the next crisis as soon as we have overcome this one. Thank you.